Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the most comprehensive Hindu analysis on YouTube. So let's look at the topics that we are going to discuss today. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 11 important articles. There are several topics which are very important for the mains exam. So let's cover them in detail. And we also have few prelims articles. So let's ensure we cover all these topics comprehensively so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. But before we start, I have a very important announcement, something which is exciting for all our viewers and all the IAS aspirants. On the 11th of April, Unacademy will be conducting the Civil Services Championship Test, the UCSC. This test gives you two very unique opportunities. One, you will get to attempt prelims type questions, 50 questions, so that you get to practice and test your knowledge. And these tests will be conducted in two slots at 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. Now, those of you who will take up the test, you will stand a chance to win some attractive rewards, including cash prizes. Cash prize to the tune of 8 lakh rupees, because we are planning to hold a national level quiz by selecting the top 32 performers. The top 32 performers will be chosen for this national level quiz, and you will be divided into 16 teams. So your entire cost of travel and accommodation for this event will be on Unacademy. And the top team which wins the quiz stands to win a cash prize of 5 lakh rupees. The runner-up team stands a chance to get a prize reward of 2 lakh rupees, and team 3 and 4 stand to win a cash prize of 50,000 each. So that's why I said it's a very exciting opportunity for all of you. You can not only attempt the practice test of 50 questions, you will also stand to win these attractive rewards by getting selected for our national quiz. So those of you who are interested, please check out the details in the link provided in the description and ensure that you enroll for the test, and you have two slots. You can decide whenever you want to give the test, either at 11 a.m. or 5 p.m. With this, let's get started and look at the first article. On page number 6, there's an editorial related to the ongoing energy transition that the world is witnessing, which is being accelerated by the global energy crisis, which has been perpetuated by the Iran war. I feel it's a very interesting take on how the war in Iran can have long lasting impact on the global economy and especially on the Indian economy. So, the Iran war, which has disrupted the supply of oil and gas, it is accelerating the ongoing energy transition towards electric vehicles and battery driven vehicles. So, in the context of this ongoing transition, which is now getting accelerated, India will face a very unique challenge. And that is exactly what this editorial is examining. So, let's go into this topic in detail. I'll take you beyond the editorial as well. But first, we have to start with a basic understanding of global energy shocks that have occurred in the past. Because this is not happening for the first time. There have been at least four major instances the last 50 odd years where global energy supplies were very severely disrupted. The first major crisis was in 1973 oil crisis, which was a result of the Yom Kippur War, when Israel went to war with some of the Arab states and United States backed Israel. The Gulf countries were furious. The Arab states, they were furious with the American support for Israel. And through the OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, major oil producing and exporting nations like Saudi Arabia, they imposed a blockade on oil production, thus destabilizing the oil markets, which had a lasting impact for several months. This was the first major oil crisis, the oil shock of 1970s. Now, this led to many changes in global economy and geopolitics. This made realize this made United States realize that it needs to exercise a greater degree of control on oil supplies and get closer to the Gulf Arab states and the monarchies. It led to the US Gulf strategic alignment. US got very close to Saudi Arabia and the other Sunni powers in the Gulf region. Along with that, we saw the establishment of the G7, where developed, industrialized, advanced economies came together: US, Canada, UK, France, and Germany, and Italy, and Japan, to establish the group to look after the global economic shocks and economic crisis. So, this was one major event that disrupted oil supplies. The second big shock was in 1979, following the Iranian Revolution. The Iranian Revolution was another earth shattering event in the Gulf region and the West Asia region, which disrupted oil supplies and oil flow. Then we had the Gulf War of 1990-91, when Saddam Hussein decided to invade Kuwait, which eventually dragged the United States into a war. And this conflict had a major disruption with regard to oil supplies and oil markets. Then the fourth oil shock happened more recently with regard to the Russia Ukraine conflict in 2022. Energy supplies were again disrupted as Russia is a key supplier. It led to shortage of various commodities as well, because both Russia Ukraine are key exporters of agrarian products and machinery as well. But more than oil, the Ukraine war led to a disruption in gas prices and gas supplies, especially for Europe, which is heavily dependent on Russian gas, which primarily passes through Ukrainian territory. We saw a major disruption which continues even today. So, the Ukraine war primarily led to a disruption in gas supplies more than oil supplies. Initially, there was an impact on oil supplies and oil prices, but more prominently, we saw disruption of gas supplies and gas prices. So these four events, they teach us one very important lesson, that all these shocks were related to fossil fuel based energy sources. We saw the disruption of oil and gas supplies because of these geopolitical developments. But what we are seeing today is fundamentally different, structurally very different. The Iran war has had a huge impact on both oil and gas supplies. And this is not an ordinary disruption. Many experts agree that you can't even compare this with 1973 crisis or the 2022 Ukraine war or the 1990 Gulf War. The blockade at Hormuz and the crippling of the supply chains of oil and gas is leading to a structural realignment in the energy market. In fact, this has been the assessment of even the International Energy Agency, which believes that this war is accelerating the shift towards electric vehicles and electrification of the transport sector. This is something which we did not witness during the previous oil shocks, be it in 1973, 79, 1990, or 2022. Eventually, the global economy slightly recovered and came back to normalcy. But right now, the world was already transitioning towards cleaner fuels, mainly because of climate change and global warming. And because of the Climate Action Summit, there have been global commitments made by countries to shift towards non fossil sources of energy, cleaner sources of energy. So the Iran war has come at the right time to accelerate this push, especially for the transport sector. We are seeing a fundamental shift which is happening from fossil fuel driven industry towards the electrification of the transport sector. Now, just to put this in perspective, we need to look at some important data which you can use in your answers as well. See, this can be a great essay topic. UPSC might ask you to write a detailed essay on the ongoing transition from fossil to non-fossil fuels in the transport sector and how the Iran war has accelerated the push. What challenges should India anticipate? So when you look at the extent of electrification which is happening because of electric vehicles and battery technology, we see a displacement that is happening in the oil industry. In 2023, around zero point 0.9 million barrels per day of oil was displaced because of adoption of electric vehicles and battery technology. This has increased by more than 30% by 2024. You see a 30% jump in 1 year, with 1.3 million barrels per day of oil being displaced because of electrification that is happening in the transport sector. Now, this change in percentage terms accounts for barely 1 to 1.3% of the global oil demand. So you might think this is not a very big shift. But trust me, what we are witnessing right now with the electrification of transport sector and the acceleration which we are going to witness following the Iran war will be a fundamental structural shift. Of course, the transition was happening, but it was happening at its own pace. Countries which are dependent on fossil fuels, be it India, China, many others, though they had focused on electrification, rolling out EV, focusing on battery technology, right now you will see a greater urgency from such countries, from Asian countries and any other country dependent on oil and gas imports, to quickly shift towards EVs and battery driven transport. And this will fundamentally alter the nature of the global economy. Now, this is where India needs to be very careful, because when you're making a complete transition, you should not end up creating new dependencies. Now, before we talk about this new dependency of India in the transportation sector and the electrification sector, let's also understand another impact of the Iran war. The Iran war could fundamentally end and break the petrodollar dominance. What is this petrodollar dominance? In 1973, after the oil crisis, as I told you, the US realized that it needs to gain greater leverage over oil production and oil pricing and oil supplies. So this led US to closely align with Saudi Arabia and the other Gulf monarchies, creating a strategic alignment between them. The US became more proactive in West Asia, and the US pushed the Gulf monarchies to adopt the US dollar as the currency to price their oil. So oil pricing shifted towards the US dollar, and this had a huge impact. This led to the dollar financing of the oil markets, and all the surplus revenue which was being generated by the Gulf monarchies was channeled back into the US economy. Since oil was being priced with regard to the US dollar, the revenue that the Gulf monarchies were generating would eventually funnel back into the US economy, creating a mutual dependency. And the US would benefit immensely because of this. It would not only gain geopolitical advantage in West Asia region, it would also enable the US to run endless fiscal deficit. It essentially allowed the US to establish a sort of a monopoly on the global economy and markets because of its control of the dollar, which in turn was tied to the very financing of the oil industry. Now, the Iran war could probably break this dominance of the petrodollar with the rise of China and the Chinese currency, and how countries are looking to make a shift away from the dollar. And if the electric transition were to happen, this could probably end this alignment or re-alter this alignment between the US and the Gulf monarchies, and could end the dominance of the petrodollar system itself. So this has very, very big implications for geopolitics and the global economy. Now, coming back to the electrification of transport sector, In order to electrify, in order to push more electric vehicles and adopt battery driven transport, you need access to critical technology. Advanced EV and battery technology is required. And for that, you need access to critical minerals, which is in short supply, right? So when you look at the global distribution of critical minerals, we have the ABC triangle or the lithium triangle in South America, with Chile alone holding 30% of global lithium reserves and Argentina holding 13%. So if you add Bolivia as well, the three ABC countries of South America, they hold close to 50% of global lithium reserves. Australia has major reserves at 20% of the global known reserves, and it's one of the leading producers of lithium, which is feeding the Western supply chains right now. Australia is critical for the plans of the Western countries led by US with regard to diversifying critical mineral supply chain. Then you look at DRC in Africa, which is going through a brutal civil war. The Democratic Republic of Congo is the world's largest producer with regard to cobalt, with 70% of global cobalt reserves and production concentrated in the DRC. That explains the civil war as well and why external powers are covertly involved to play a role in the DRC conflict, which is primarily to gain control over critical resources present in the DRC. Apart from cobalt, DRC even has deposits of lithium and other precious minerals. Then look at Canada. Canada is playing a major role in critical and strategic minerals. It has vast reserves of lithium, nickel, and cobalt. Indonesia has a leading dominant position with regard to nickel supplies. Nickel is also critical for battery technology and electric vehicles. Then what we need is copper. Copper is another key mineral, which is mainly controlled by Chile and Peru. They hold a vast majority of the world copper resources. So since very few countries have these critical minerals, and China already has a dominant position on these supply chains, controlling mines, controlling refining, processing, and distribution. China has established a very great degree of control over critical mineral supply chains. Now, parallelly, we are witnessing a counter strategy by the West, led by United States, through initiatives like Pax Silica and Mineral Security Partnership of the Biden administration, through which the West is trying to create parallel supply chains to control the mining, refining, processing, and the distribution of critical minerals. Now, in the midst of this new competition and new rivalry which is coming up, India will face a very difficult choice. That is the core argument being made in this editorial. Where does this leave India? See, we are witnessing the world move from fossil fuels towards electrification when it comes to the transport sector. So, as of now, India has very extensive dependency on fossil fuel imports as we do not have sufficient reserves and we depend to a great extent on import of oil and gas supplies. Almost 88, 89% import dependency for crude oil, 50 to 60% dependency for gas imports. So, as we make this transition towards electrification of the transport sector, India will need access to EV technology and battery technology. And we are not a leading power in both EVs and battery tech. Other countries like China, even Japan, South Korea, few Southeast Asian countries, Western powers led by US, European countries, and Australia, they hold the key when it comes to EV tech and battery tech. And we just understood how critical mineral supply chains are concentrated in the hands of just a few nations. Very few countries have massive reserves, and global powers like China, US are creating their own supply blocks. So, does it mean India will end up again depending on either China or the West? Will it end up creating a new form of dependency for India? Right? So, this is the learning for us. This is the lesson that we should draw. And the Iran war should act as a catalyst to push India towards greater self reliance when it comes to EV technology, battery technology, and gaining access to our own critical mineral supply chains. See, right now, when it comes to lithium, nickel, etc., we have almost 100% dependency on China controlled supply chains. And recently, we have joined the Pax Silica initiative, hoping that US and its allies will help us. But that again is a new form of dependency. So ideally, India should reduce the dependency and try to chart an independent path. See, when it came to oil and gas, India doesn't have much control over it, right? But when it comes to EV tech, battery technology, and critical minerals, we can change the game right now. With right policies, right push, and initiatives, India can try to become self reliant as much as possible. You can never end dependency. You can't have complete independence. But at least reducing the dependency, ensuring that we are not so vulnerable with regard to external supplies, that should be the priority for India. And that should be the lesson we draw from the Iran war. So, based on what we have discussed, please take up this practice question. And I hope that you use the question for your answer writing practice. Now, let's move to the next article. It's again related to the same topic, but it provides some very interesting details about LPG, LNG, CNG, PNG. You can understand what's the difference between these four energy sources and why India is giving a push to adopt piped gas supplies. Why are we looking to replace LPG, which is primarily used for cooking in households and also in commercial establishments? It also has some industrial application. So, why is India looking to move away from LPG and adopt PNG primarily for cooking and industrial activities? See, recently, the government of India has made a very bold statement. As of now, when you look at retail LPG connections in the country, we have around 33 crore household connections. Especially in the last decade, we have added easily 12 to 13 crore connections because of the PM Ujjwala scheme. And India has extensively adopted LPG connections across households because of the ease of transportation and how easy it was to adopt this as a cooking fuel. But right now, the government is looking to make a big shift following the Iran war. The government has said domestic natural gas production alone will be enough to cater to 30 crore connections if we shift the households towards PNG, piped natural gas. Instead of using LPG cylinders, if we make a shift towards piped natural gas, in another decade, we can try to push several crore households towards PNG, where India can be a little self reliant, if not entirely self reliant. It will reduce our overall dependency for LPG imports from the Gulf countries. So let's go into this article and understand how LPG is different from LNG, CNG, and PNG. What is India's plans with regard to piped natural gas? Can we achieve this objective? And what are the challenges? The LPG, liquefied petroleum gas, is essentially a byproduct of both the crude oil and the natural gas industry. The processing of oil from oil refineries and the processing of gas is what results in LPG. It's a byproduct of that. Propane and butane, which are derived from gas and oil refining, is mixed and then it is pressurized by cooling it down to around 40 degrees Celsius. And it's very easy to bottle LPG in cylinders. This is what makes it convenient for transportation, distribution, and last mile connectivity, right? So once it is placed in cylinders, it's easy to carry out the physical delivery of the cylinders. So if India, let's say, is importing a lot of LPG, we do have some domestic production of LPG as well. And once the LPG arrives through ships from ports to houses, you can easily distribute the cylinders. And with regard to domestic production as well, whatever is domestically produced, it can be easily bottled up in cylinders and you dispatch it through road network and rail network. You can rely on trucks, even bicycles if required, to ensure that each and every household will easily get access to LPG cylinders. So it's primarily because of the ease of last mile delivery that India adopted LPG on a massive scale. In many countries, you don't see this. Many countries don't use LPG for cooking. India adopted LPG because of practical constraints, economic constraints. Because providing piped natural gas to every house in India was unthinkable many years and decades ago. This requires an extensive network of piped gas connection. You need thousands and thousands of kilometers of piped connection, that too in densely populated areas, in big cities, where it is a very difficult challenge to achieve piped natural gas connection. So, because of the ease of last mile delivery, India had preferably adopted LPG, which was much easier to transport and distribute. But however, this is exposing our weakness right now. And I'll explain why. I'll come to that a little while later. Now, what is LNG in comparison to LPG? Liquefied natural gas. This is essentially natural gas which is liquefied at ultra low temperatures of minus 160 to minus 163 degrees Celsius. Because see, natural gas will take up massive volume. When you liquefy it, that volume reduces by nearly 1,000 times. So that in a smaller space, in a smaller container, you can store more natural gas in liquefied form. Then it becomes easy to transport, right? Otherwise, how will you transport natural gas from country to country? Liquefaction helps in compressing that volume by almost 1,000 times, which helps it to store in containers, load it on cargo ships. They have specialized containers for this, which will maintain this ultra low temperature. And from the source to destination, this low temperature is maintained. And once it is loaded at the destination port, then it is regasified by the refiners. It is regasified and then supplied through a pipe network as piped natural gas. Basically, LNG is mainly for transportation from country to country. Liquefying natural gas makes it easy to transport at ultra low temperature. The gas will liquefy and the volume will drop by almost 1,000 times, meaning in a small container you can store more gas in liquefied form. So once you bring it through imports, you have to regasify it and you supply it through piped connections. So that is your PNG. But as I said, depending too much on LNG, PNG was difficult for India many years ago because of the extensive pipe networks that were required. But we do use LNG on a large scale. It's not that we don't use LNG. LNG is primarily used in industries. There are multiple industries which use LNG on a massive scale. But we never considered LNG for housing and retail cooking. That is the shift that India is making right now. In the last few years, PNG connections are being rolled out in India. We have already built a decent pipe network across the country, and LNG is being supplied as PNG for cooking purposes as well. But now we have to accelerate this shift in order to reduce our dependency on LPG imports. So when you look at the other type of gas, CNG, compressed natural gas. CNG is primarily used in transport sector, where natural gas is compressed with a pressure of 200 to 250 kilograms per square centimeter. It is used as a vehicular fuel for autos, for taxis, etc. CNG is primarily used as a vehicular fuel where compressed gas is used because compression will again reduce the volume, makes it easy to pack it up in cylinders, and use it for quick distribution. So this is your compressed natural gas. Now, when you look at the idea behind giving a push for PNG, see, right now, when you look at natural gas production and imports in India, we import roughly 27 million tons of LNG on a yearly basis. And our domestic production is almost the same. How much we import, almost the same is domestically produced, which means with regard to LNG supply, we have 50% dependency, right? Compared to the demand we have, 50% is domestically produced, which is around 27 million tons, and remaining 50% is imported, which is the other 27 million tons. When you compare this with LPG, in case of LPG, we have a much higher dependency. Three-fifths of LPG that we consume, which is primarily used for cooking purposes, is imported in India. Domestic production is very less. It will not even meet a fraction of the demand. Three-fifths of our LPG requirement is imported, and the worst part is that 90% of this LPG is coming from the Gulf. It has to pass through Hormuz Strait. Countries like Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Oman, they are the leading suppliers of LPG for India. And this passes through Hormuz Strait, which creates the vulnerability for India. So that is why India is looking at reorienting its strategy to reduce dependency on LPG and shift towards LNG, PNG supplies, where dependency would be just around 50%, and we can reduce this even further. Compared to LPG, where we have very high dependency, and since supplies are not diversified, supplies are mainly coming from the Gulf through Hormuz Strait. That's why we are so vulnerable. That is not the case with LNG. We can increase our domestic LNG production, right? We have new deposits found in the KG basin, the Krishna Godavari basin. Discoveries are being made in the Andaman Nicobar belt. We can step up our domestic production by 10 to 30%. Plus, we have multiple import sources. There are multiple countries which can supply LNG to India. So it won't be a critical problem for us, even if there is a crisis, right? We can easily shift and diversify because there are multiple countries that are supplying LNG. India can also step up domestic production of LNG. So this is a much better alternative compared to having a critical dependency on the Gulf and Hormuz for LPG supplies. 90% of LPG imports coming from here. So this is the whole um, strategy that the government is trying to push. Now, the point is, can natural gas so easily replace LPG? That's more of a technical question. Because see, right now, Indian kitchens, Indian industries, which are using LPG, they are used to certain equipment, and the equipment is designed to handle a particular fuel, which is LPG. Can they directly adopt natural gas? Can they switch to LNG and PNG? This is very easy for cooking. For cooking, there is absolutely no technical concerns, right? For your stoves, be it LPG or piped natural gas being supplied, doesn't really matter. With regard to energy output, there is some difference. Natural gas is much lighter, and 1 kilogram of natural gas actually delivers more energy than 1 kilogram of LPG. But when it comes to cooking, it doesn't make much of a difference. There is eventually a loss of heat between the burner and the vessel, right? Eventually, the efficiency level comes down to the same rate. So when it comes to household cooking or for any cooking purposes, LPG can be easily replaced with PNG. We just have to provide the piped connections. But in industry, it's not so easy. Now you take MSME industries where a lot of welding, cutting is done. There, lot of LPG is used by industries. Now, to shift these industries to PNG, it might require some modifications in the equipment. See, first of all, it requires awareness as well within the industry, and pricing should be same. If you're supplying LNG through piped connections, the pricing and the cost competitiveness should be there with LPG. Only then you can push the consumers to adapt to this new fuel. And you have to spread awareness in the industry, provide some help and assistance and technical training so that any equipment which has to be modified in MSME factories, they can be quickly done so that they can shift from LPG to PNG. But the shift is possible, right? It's not very difficult or impossible. Maybe some changes would be required depending on the industry and the application. Now, when I look at LNG usage in India, there are many industries which rely on LNG extensively. For example, the refinery industry consumes 35% of LNG that is used. Fertilizer industry has massive dependency. 30% of natural gas is used by fertilizer industry. The power industry, there are gas-fired power plants that consume around 13% of our LNG supplies. Then we also have city gas distribution. I told you, right? India has already implemented piped natural gas distribution in some cities and regions of the country. I'll explain that as well. You need to know the piped gas network of India. So this accounts for around 20% of the total LNG supplies. So if we are making a big shift, we need to plan, we need to accelerate the pipe network so that we can achieve that last mile delivery, right? These are the challenges that we need to keep in mind. The shift can be made. Theoretically, on paper, it sounds like a great idea, but practically on the ground, the implementation has to be done, right? One, industries have to be prepared, any modifications have to be done. Next, you need to build a very vast and extensive pipe network so that PNG can be distributed, which is nothing but your LNG. Now, let's take a look at India's piped gas network. This is a critical infrastructure. There can be a prelims question, or you can use this data and this information in mains answers. India has already built around 25,000 kilometers of piped gas network. Public sector companies like GAIL, Gas India Limited, along with ONGC, they've already set up quite an extensive piped gas network, especially in western and northern parts of India. There you have much better coverage. We already have 1.5 crore households using piped gas connections. This number will very soon hit 2 crore because now the government has made a new rule that a household cannot have both PNG and LPG. You can't be buying LPG cylinders at the same time having a piped gas connection at your home. This is being banned. So 3 months time is being given to 6 million households who have both connections. So they will have to return their LPG cylinders to keep their PNG connection. So within few months, in 3 to 4 months, we will have 2 crore households connected with PNG supply. But compared to this, we have 33 crore households depending on LPG. So how will you shift such a massive number towards PNG? This is going to be the biggest administrative challenge for India. Right now, we are increasing our piped gas network at a rate of 18% every year. But studies have shown that if we have to achieve the target of 12 crore PNG connections by 2035, then the pipe network has to grow at a rate of 24%, which is going to be a big challenge because laying pipe network is capital intensive. Plus, you need a lot of approvals, permissions from local city authorities. There might be some land acquisition which is required, and laying the pipes in a safe manner and ensuring that meters are installed, the pricing is handled properly. The operational challenge is massive. So, when you look at the piped gas network in India, it is quite extensive in western and northern parts of India, with some connections in southern parts of India, like in parts of Kerala, in Bengaluru. You have some pockets where PNG connections have already been set up. And there is a new pipeline which is coming up from the Tamil Nadu region towards Bengaluru, and it extends towards central and eastern parts of India, mainly focusing on tier 2, tier 3 towns. And the same line will extend towards northeast India. So this is where we have the biggest gap. We have done pretty well with regard to Western and Northern India, but there are many gaps in Southern, Central, and Northeastern parts of India. So right now, this is the focus of our piped gas project to widen the network here. And also, the pipeline which is being built is as of now oriented towards industrial supply. Whereas now we have to make a shift towards using PNG for household retail supply as well. So this will require extensive coordination between center, state, and local authorities and public sector companies like GAIL and ONGC. So parallelly, we have to step up our domestic production, which ONGC is already trying to do in the Krishna Godavari basin. And studies have shown we can easily jump our domestic LNG production by 10% at least, just because of the KG basin. So compared to LPG import dependency, LNG dependency is much, much better for India. Of course, there are big challenges, but if planned well, executed well, we can slightly become self-reliant, right? Even in 2035, we will have a lot of dependency on LPG. Because see, when you have 33 crore households using LPG and just 2 crore households having PNG connection, by 2035, our goal is to have 12 crore household connections of PNG, right? Which means you still have a massive gap of nearly 20 crore households depending on LPG. So LPG dependency will not end even in 10, 20, 30 years. But we can reduce the dependency. So adopting piped natural gas supply, mainly for cooking and industrial purposes, moving more towards LNG, will give some degree of self-reliance and reduce our vulnerability to supply shocks. That is the whole point. So please take up this practice question and be sure of the differences between LPG, LNG, PNG, and CNG. Can be a great prelims question. Also, be aware of the piped gas network of India. This can also be a prelims question. And be aware of our LPG, LNG dependency in terms of percentages, in terms of data. There can be factual questions in prelims, and you need to quote this data in your mains answers as well. Now, moving on, we have a related article to West Asia and the geopolitics of the Iran war. So here, we'll not waste your time because, of course, these topics will keep repeating. But there are 2 points that we can take away from this particular article. The US Israel war against Iran was not well thought out by both US and Israel. That is something which is very evident. Neither Israel nor the Americans had a clear goal in mind. They thought it's going to be an easy walkover. They assumed that their military superiority will help wipe out the Iranian regime, right? Any basic student of IR would have told you that Iran is not a walkover, right? This again defies logic that the US Department of War, the CIA, the White House got it so wrong because the Trump administration genuinely believed they could simply walk over Iran and topple the regime itself. Now they're realizing this hard lesson, they're learning it pretty late, that Iran packs a punch. It packs a pretty formidable firepower. It might be much, much weaker compared to Israel and US militarily, but it can cause significant damage, and it has used this leverage effectively in West Asia, be it the setting the entire region on fire by targeting all the Gulf states, primarily American targets, the Gulf countries, or be it leveraging the Hormuz Strait and crippling energy supplies and spiking energy prices. This has been the simple, cost effective strategy of Iran, right? The decentralization of its command control structure and the new doctrine it had adopted, that even if the leadership is wiped out, the mid and low level commanders, they will continue this retaliation using low cost options, cheap drones, cheaper missiles, and cruise missiles to target energy infrastructure and critical infrastructure in the region, and thus levy a cost by engaging in this asymmetric warfare. This was very much anticipated, but US and Israel, they were overconfident. Rather, they ignored the facts, they ignored the truth on the ground. So now that they are realizing this pretty late, they are looking for an exit, right? That's why the urgency to strike a deal. So this is where the role of Pakistan comes into picture again. Pakistan has carefully positioned itself as a potential mediator. See, every day Trump is making a flip flop. Honestly, nobody knows what exactly the US is doing. Right? Few hours back, he says Iran is agreeing to talks, ceasefire is on the verge of it, and we are exiting. Within few hours, he says we are going to bomb Iran back to Stone Age. So, given this flip flop by the Trump administration and the repeated denials by Iran that they are involved in any kind of serious talks, there is a lot of ambiguity in that regard. But Iran has acknowledged that yes, Pakistan is acting as an intermediary. It has presented the so called 15-point peace plan that Trump is pushing. Though Iran will reject this, Iran is not accepting it. Iran has acknowledged that yes, Pakistan has delivered these demands of Donald Trump, right? Now, this alone can make Pakistan pretty prominent in global geopolitics. See, right now, Pakistan has managed to warm up to the US, particularly with Donald Trump. Both Asim Munir and Shehbaz Sharif have built a very good personal chemistry and equation, which causes a lot of discomfort for India. We need to acknowledge the fact that Pakistan is managing to gain that relevance, which could have a negative implication on India. Plus, Pakistan is trying to get back some support for its economy from the US and as well as from the Gulf. Since Pakistan is the only Muslim country with a nuclear weapon, that gives Pakistan a very unique leverage with the Gulf monarchies as well. Saudi Pakistan have a mutual defense agreement. It has close ties with UAE, Qatar, and Kuwait as well. So Pakistan is trying to leverage this to its advantage, maybe extract economic commitments from them in return. Since Pakistan is being accepted by Iran as well as a mediator, right, it can work on all the sides. It can work with the Shia power bloc, the Sunni power bloc, and the West. And this basically enhances the profile of Pakistan. It could allow Pakistan to gain more geopolitical leverage. It could allow Pakistan to access economic support, which it desperately needs because of its collapsing economy, right? It could also help Pakistan to step up its trade in the region, both with Iran and the Gulf countries. And this is something India should watch out for. Pakistan will definitely draw economic and geopolitical benefits from the conflict which is happening because of its positioning as a mediator. And it will be able to tap more financial resources from Saudi, UAE. It will be able to tap more support from US. It will be able to engage in cross-border trade with Iran as well later on. So this advantage that Pakistan is gaining will create will directly create a disadvantage for India, right? So that is one concern that we have to keep in mind. The second impact of Trump's policies and the ongoing conflict is the shift in regional architecture that we are going to see in the Persian Gulf, in West Asia region. See, many countries are frustrated, especially countries like Kuwait. Kuwait has openly criticized regional groups like the Arab League of being a useless organization. The Arab League is an important grouping of this region, and yet it has played a minimal role in de escalating this conflict. Kuwait is also expressing its unhappiness about the GCC, the Gulf Cooperation Council, since they can't rely on American security guarantees. Right? It has been proven again and again that US can't be trusted as a security partner. Now, countries like Saudi, UAE are realizing the importance of being self-reliant in defense. See, this is the costly mistake many countries have made, from Ukraine to UK, to entire Europe, in fact, to Japan to South Korea, to the Gulf nations. They always assumed US would be there giving them a security guarantee, buying some American weapons. And now they realize that they're not capable of defending themselves. And if US comes under leaders like Trump, who says, look after your own security, I don't care about your nation and your interests, then these countries stand exposed completely, right? So that's the reason why questions are being raised about existing regional architectures and groupings and the current leadership that you have in West Asia. So it is pushing countries like Saudi, UAE, and others to rethink their own security. They have to become more self reliant, and they might even end up creating better security ties with Pakistan. They might end up altering the existing architecture of Arab League and GCC or come out with new groupings as well. Because just a few years ago, within the Gulf Cooperation Council, there was a big split within the Sunni bloc where Qatar had been isolated, Qatar had been boycotted by other Sunni powers led by Saudi Arabia. Because see, Bahrain, then even Oman, UAE, and Kuwait, they largely follow the footsteps of Saudi Arabia when it comes to the Sunni world. Qatar was the one standout. Qatar was accused of sponsoring the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas. It was accused of working with various terror groups aligned with Iranian interests. Then Qatar's news agency, Al Jazeera, was also accused by the Sunni powers of biased reporting. On these grounds, Qatar was isolated within the GCC group. It was boycotted, a blockade was imposed on it. Diplomatic ties were cut off between these countries. And all these Sunni powers, they even imposed a proper economic and transportation blockade. But now, Iran's challenge in the region is finally pushing these Sunni powers to keep their differences aside. Recently, differences have come up between Saudi and UAE as well. Since UAE is asserting itself, it has aligned closely with Israel, recognizing Israel under Abraham Accords. The UAE has become more emboldened. It is involved in many conflicts in covert warfare in Yemen, in Sudan, right? It's accused of backing radical militant groups. And this runs counter to Saudi interests, creating a friction and divide between them. So finally, the war in Iran is bringing the Sunni bloc together, and they might re-evaluate the very relevance of existing groups like GCC and the Arab League. So that is another key point we take away from this article. Now, from a prelims perspective, you should know what is GCC, when was it set up, who are the members. Same with Arab League as well. Basic facts for prelims questions. So GCC is a political economic union of the Persian Gulf countries founded in 1981. It's essentially a Sunni power bloc led by Saudi Arabia with other major Sunni powers like Bahrain, Kuwait, Oman, Qatar, and the UAE. All of them are monarchies, authoritarian, dictatorial sort of countries. Though some are constitutional monarchies, most countries here are authoritarian, conservative, and orthodox in nature. When you look at Arab League, the Arab League dates back to the Second World War period. It was set up through the Alexandria Protocol in 1944 in Egypt by signing the Alexandria Protocol, and it was formally established in Cairo in 1945. It brings together the Arab states. It's also called the League of Arab States. So, from across West Asia and Africa, all the Arab states have come together. There are 22 Arab nations which are part of it. I've added a map as well over here so that it's easier for you to remember this. So, several West Asian countries, North African, and even some East African countries are part of it. And please note, India is an observer state to the Arab League. India very actively participates as an observer in the Arab League. Now, moving on to the next article, a quick update with regard to the special intensive revision, the SIR exercise that the Election Commission of India has been carrying out. See, SIR exercise has been conducted in states like Bihar. Now it's taking place in West Bengal. Several lakh voters have been removed from the list. Deceased voters, absentee voters, migrant voters who have moved out from the constituency. All the names have been filtered out so that the integrity of the electoral rolls can be maintained. But however, given the number of voters who are removed from the list, there has always been a concern that some genuine voters might also have been excluded. right? There is a concern that unfair exclusions might have happened due to the lack of documentation. Maybe some voters could not establish that they were residents of this constituency, and their names might have been unfairly removed or excluded. So, does this mean this voter will lose the right to vote? Does it mean that the statutory right to vote would be snatched, would be taken away if there are unfair exclusions? If a genuine voter has been removed from the list because of some reason, right? Because of poor verification, lack of documents, then does it mean that the voter has no right to exercise his vote ever? This matter was brought up at the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court, led by a three-judge bench, headed by Chief Justice of India Suryakant, has observed that exclusion from electoral roll through the SIR exercise doesn't repeal your voting rights forever. So the Election Commission of India has already created a appellate process where those who have grievances, those who feel that they have been excluded unfairly, they can raise appeal in front of these appellate tribunals. These tribunals are headed by former judges of high courts. So this gives a second chance for the voters to raise their grievance, bring up an appeal over here, and ensure that their names are considered and included so that they don't lose the right to vote. Now, even if the appellate process fails, they can always take the route of adjudication. They can finally approach the courts to seek relief, ensure that their right to vote is protected. So the Supreme Court has made this observation that removal from electoral rolls because of SIR doesn't mean your voting right is being taken away permanently. There is a appellate process, there is a adjudication process, and Election Commission has been directed with the Supreme Court to ensure that anyone who has been unfairly excluded is given enough number of chances to prove their genuineness and ensure that the names are included in the voter list. Coming to the next article, we have a series of articles that gives updates on Iran war and the ongoing economic crisis. So it's important to stay up to date. India has increased commercial LPG prices and aviation turbine fuel prices. So that is one update for you. Commercial LPG price has increased by 10% because obviously the government would not like to touch the household LPG prices, which will have a very serious political impact as well. So commercial LPG prices have been driven up, and this will definitely translate into a higher cost when you are eating outside. And this could also jack up industrial cost as well. Then aviation turbine fuel has jumped by 9%. So this is already impacting airline prices, air ticket prices, with major airlines like Indigo already adding an additional levy to account for the expensive aviation turbine fuel. So this is the cascading effect that you get to see. Right? That's why I wanted to pick this article. You don't have to go back and read the article entirely. Just ensure that you're aware of this real world impact. How the Iran war is actually having a ground level impact, where even a common man will start paying the price eventually, right? Because of this unnecessary war. Next, another impact of the conflict. The remittance flow to India might face a significant hit. India is the world's largest recipient of inward remittances. We overtook China 4 years ago, and we have been the largest recipient of inward remittances, receiving close to $130 billion from our diaspora, right? And this is critical to bridge our current account deficit. Now, out of the remittances we receive, West Asia is the most critical region because more than 50% of the total remittance is coming from West Asia alone. And states like Kerala are the biggest recipients because Kerala has a very wide spread out diaspora community, most of them concentrated in the Gulf countries. So, according to a study, Kerala alone might see a 20% drop in the flow of remittances from West Asia because of the Iran war. So, imagine the overall impact. right? So this is another implication of the Iran conflict. Next, the Indian government has eased the restrictions for SEZs to sell their products in the domestic market. Because these special economic zones, they are dedicated export oriented units. They are meant for boosting exports. So whatever is produced in a SEZ, they are given tax incentives primarily to boost exports, right? Some duty free access is given, duties are rationalized, tax is reduced, and some incentives are also added for units operating in SEZs, so that whatever they produce is exported, which can increase our overall exports. But now exports are getting impacted because see, global demand will take a hit. Supply chains have been distorted. The war has created a lot of tensions. The global economy was already going through a period of uncertainty since the COVID-19 pandemic. So, since exports are getting affected, this will directly impact SEZs and they might even go idle. They might even stop production. So, to avoid that, in the union budget this year, the government had already proposed this idea that we will allow SEZs to sell some of their products in the domestic market. So, this is now being enabled in the context of the Iran war to save the units that are manufacturing units in special economic zones. But this raises a concern as well. Will it affect domestic producers? Won't this lead to heightened competition between domestic producers and producers in SEZs? So, can you think about this and let me know what is your take on this particular uh, dilemma? Do you think selling SEZ products in our domestic market creates a lot of competition for domestic producers? Let me know. I'll leave this to you. I want you to think about this so that you basically do some more research and understand how the economy actually functions. So, can you tell me whether domestic producers will be affected if SEZ units start selling their products domestically? Next, Donald Trump, again, has been busy causing a lot of confusion in the last 24 hours. Again, he has said Iran is seeking a ceasefire. Iran has completely denied such claims. Within few hours, he has now said he delivered a speech to the US citizens recently, just a few hours ago, and he has said that US is going to bomb Iran to back to Stone Age within a few weeks if Iran doesn't budge and agree to a deal. But what is more important and what is more concerning is that Trump is taking direct aim at NATO. He has even said he is considering to quit NATO altogether. And this could have serious implications for global security architecture, right? So that is one development we'll have to watch out for. Now, Trump is expecting NATO allies to take up responsibility for clearing up Hormuz Strait and ensuring the movement of ships and vessels, right? He has been very open about this and criticizing the European nations. It's primarily on this basis that he wants to quit NATO. He believes that NATO allies are not doing enough. But don't forget, Trump never consulted them to start this war, right? Why would UK or France or Germany get involved in this unnecessary war? They are very, very clear about this. The European nations, despite being NATO allies, they're very clear that they'll not get involved in the war. But however, it's being reported that UK is considering to create a task force of around 35 nations, including primarily European nations, to escort vessels in the Hormuz Strait. So, escort mission is different compared to a combat mission, right? Now, you might ask, how come NATO allies are not coming to the defense of US? Because NATO guarantees collective defense under Article 5. It's built on the principle of collective defense. But please understand, NATO allies have no obligation in this case because US was not attacked by Iran. US was the aggressor with Israel. So NATO allies have no obligation on them to come to the defense of US. Why? Because Iran was not the one which attacked them. It was US which went and attacked them. Now Iran is retaliating. So it's an unnecessary war for the European nations. They were not even consulted. Obviously, they don't want to get involved and dragged into this unnecessary conflict, right? But it is putting a strain on the NATO alliance. And that's why probably UK is trying to appease Donald Trump and is trying to put together a task force which can ensure the safety of passage of vessels through the Hormuz Strait. Now, coming to the next topic, on page 12, there's an article that refers to NSCN-K, the NSCN Khaplang, which is a Northeast insurgent outfit focused on Nagaland. The article here is referring to the attempts by this insurgent group to try and push the local population towards Christianity. Now, let me give you a brief background of NSCN and NSCN-K. The National Socialist Council of Nagaland, one of the most notorious insurgent organizations, founded in 1980 to create the so-called Greater Nagaland or Nagalim. The Naga insurgency is India's oldest insurgent movement. It broke out in 1947, just before India's independence. Even before India could become independent, the Naga National Council, the NNC, had already declared a separatist insurgent war against the Indian state. India had managed to weaken the NNC by imposing AFSPA, by conducting counterinsurgency operations, and we had mediated the Shillong Accord in 1970s to bring the Naga insurgency to an end. India had even granted statehood to Nagaland, right? In 1960s, separate statehood had been granted to satisfy the political aspirations because until then it was part of Assam. But please understand the Naga community, which is made up of sub-clans of Nagas, they are spread out across the region. So you find Nagas not just in Nagaland, you find them in Assam, you find them in Manipur, you also find them across the border in Myanmar. So to deal with this initial insurgency, India approached this with a security perspective. It deployed security forces, the Indian Army and Assam Rifles, under the special powers of AFSPA, and countered the NNC, weakened the group, and negotiated the Shillong Accord. Parallelly, statehood had been granted, and the Indian government was also willing to provide a higher degree of constitutional autonomy in order to peacefully resolve and end the conflict. Some of the leaders of NNC had accepted the deal, but there were three notorious leaders who rejected the Shillong Peace Accord. These three leaders were Isaac, Muiwa, and Khaplang. These three Naga insurgent leaders, they rejected the Shillong Peace Accord and they went on to establish the NSCN in 1980. This deadly group set up base in neighboring Myanmar and as well as in Bangladesh, and used to operate from here with links with other insurgent groups like ULFA and the Bodo insurgent outfits. And it continued to harass Indian security forces, carrying out major attacks in the northeast. But later in 1988, the NSCN split into two factions. Because of ideological differences between Isaac, Muiwa, and Khaplang, the group split on ideological lines and it gave rise to NSCN IM faction, the Isaac Muiwa faction, and the NSCN K or NSCN Khaplang faction. The NSCN IM took refuge in Bangladesh with support from the hostile government under the military rule and the BNP. And the Khaplang faction took shelter in Myanmar with reported links to other insurgent groups and as well as with Chinese intelligence, receiving funds, arms, and support from them. With Pakistan also being reportedly involved from Bangladesh, backing NSCN IM to some extent. Eventually, India managed to tackle the threat. We weakened these outfits. They even signed a suspension of operations agreement in 1990s and early 2000s. They were supposed to agree to the ceasefire and engage in peace talks. But both the groups did not respect the suspension of operations agreement and they continued to operate. But after 2009, when Sheikh Hasina became the prime minister in Bangladesh, when Awami League government came to power, she decimated these insurgent groups by working with the Manmohan Singh government. India Bangladesh coordinated their intelligence and counterinsurgency operations, destroying the base that existed in Bangladesh for ULFA, for NSCN, IM, and the Bodo outfits. So leaders like Isaac and Muiwa were handed over to India and they were forced to engage in peace talks with India. So in 2014-2015, the Modi government signed a Naga framework agreement to begin the peace process, and the peace process is parallelly continuing with the Isaac Muiwa faction. But this peace process was rejected by Khaplang, and immediately they retaliated with a major terror attack in Manipur against Indian army. It was a retaliation against the peace process that was initiated in 2015 with the Isaac Muiwa faction of NSCN. If you have seen the movie Uri, it opens with a scene from northeast India, closer to Myanmar border, where insurgent groups carries out a big attack on an Indian army convoy. That's a real incident. That's exactly the attack I'm referring to. This attack was carried out by the Khaplang faction of NSCN. So India retaliated by carrying out surgical strikes deep inside Myanmar's territory, where the NSCN Khaplang faction had a safe haven. So later on, Khaplang passed away in 2017, and this faction still remains active in Myanmar. It has not surrendered. The NSCN IM faction has surrendered. They are currently engaged in talks with India, though they are involved in controversial criminal activities in Nagaland. The Khaplang faction has already surrendered. It has refused to surrender, and it has continued to wage a war against India. Now, what is interesting about NSCN is that it has always fused its left wing extremist ideology with Christian nationalism, which is quite rare. You don't often see left wing extremists aligning with any kind of religious ideology. But the Naga insurgents are a rare exception. We had seen this with Mizo insurgents as well, when the Mizo insurgency existed, where their goal was to separate this region to form a separate Christian nation. So NSCN Kaplang cadres who are active in the region in Arunachal Pradesh and Nagaland belt, they're trying to enforce religious conversion, which is now being targeted by the security and the state establishment. And also please note, the NSCN and all its factions, they are designated terror organizations under the UAPA, under the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act. Now coming to the prelim section, let's quickly wrap up the session for today. On page 4, this article that refers to a bill being passed in Lok Sabha to recognize Amravati as the only capital of Andhra Pradesh. See, after Andhra Pradesh was bifurcated into Andhra Pradesh and Telangana, in 2014, the Reorganization Act was passed. So, under the Reorganization Act, Amravati was chosen as the new capital for Andhra Pradesh to be built from scratch. And for the time being, Hyderabad would be a joint shared capital between both the states. But the Jagan Mohan Reddy government, which was in power previously, the YS Jagan Mohan Reddy government, proposed a three capital plan, proposed a very different idea to have Vishakhapatnam as the administrative capital, with Amravati being just the legislative capital and Kurnool being the judicial capital. So this model was proposed by the YS Jagan Mohan Reddy government, but the Chandrababu Naidu government, which came later, has rejected this plan, that it's impractical to have three distinct capitals for administrative, legislative, and judicial functions. It will only create a lot of confusion, miscommunication, and affect the citizens eventually. So now the parliament has taken the step, after consulting with the state government, to designate Amravati as the sole capital for Andhra Pradesh. So any such changes falls under Article 3 provisions of the Indian Constitution. Right? If internal boundaries of India are being altered, a new state has to be created, the name of the state has to be changed, some boundary change or capital change has to be made. This power lies entirely with the Parliament of India. Parliament has exclusive jurisdiction over it under Article 3. So the process is that the President of India will have to initiate such a proposal, and the President forwards the recommendation to the state legislative assembly for a consultation. But whatever feedback is given by the state is not binding on the president, right? So the center can unilaterally make the changes, but the process provides for consultation with the states. And finally, through a simple majority, the bill is passed, and it's not considered as an amendment under Article 360. So it's not a constitutional amendment, but it will lead to changes in schedules like Schedule 1, where the names have to be changed, in Schedule 4, for example. Right? So this is your constitutional process. Now, moving on, India has approved the rollout of its first ever dengue vaccine. As you know, dengue is a deadly viral disease with mosquitoes acting as the primary vector. And there have been several dengue outbreaks across India, and it keeps happening seasonally. So, vector control is one primary approach, which is to ensure that mosquitoes do not have enough breeding ground, and you need to use sufficient amount of insecticides to ensure that there is no um, mosquito population which can spread the disease further. And once symptoms set in, it results in flu-like symptoms, turns quite severe. It can even have a mortality rate where, without the right treatment, the patients might even lose their life. So this has indeed placed a big burden on India. The disease burden is quite high, as every year lakhs and millions of them can get affected. So there is a vaccine available which is used globally as well. It's already rolled out in 40 countries. It's called Qdenga. It has received regulatory approval from the Drug Controller General of India, and it can target different serotypes of the dengue virus. It's a live attenuated virus which is used in the vaccine sample, but it can target the different serotypes of the dengue virus. But what you should keep in mind is that this vaccine is good at modifying the severity of the disease, not block the transmission in itself. Usually, vaccines block the transmission and create herd level immunity, but that's not how Qdenga works. It will help modify the severity of the disease, makes it more manageable, makes it just like a regular flu, and it will not have any impact on the transmission of the disease. So, this can't be our only weapon to control the spread of dengue. So, we will have to continue to rely on vector control and other traditional methods, but the vaccine will definitely help in reducing loss of life and increasing the severity of the disease. Next, the director, the Directorate of Foreign Trade, in consultation with Finance and Commerce Ministry, has extended the RoDTEP scheme for 6 months. This again is a result of the Iran war. Remission of duties and taxes on exported products, RoDTEP. It was rolled out in 2021 to provide tax refunds, duty refunds to exporters to give them some benefit. Because where they cannot claim tax refund, the government introduced this scheme where exporters who meet certain criteria and targets, they are eligible for refund of certain duties and taxes, and it is in line with WTO norms. It does not violate WTO norms. So this is a support policy for exporters to boost exports and ensure that the financial burden on exporters is reduced. So RoDTEP expired and it had been extended by 1 month. But now the government had stopped the scheme for 1 week. But since the export industry is under tremendous pressure because of the Iran war and the supply chain disruption, the government has decided to extend the scheme again by 6 months till September. Next, a very, very big development in the world of space and science and technology. Just few hours ago, NASA has embarked on the next lunar mission, which is the first ever lunar mission for mankind in the last 5 decades. Last time humans entered towards the lunar orbit was back in 1972 under the Apollo program, under the Apollo 17 mission. Because of cost constraints, US, that is NASA, had suspended its lunar mission. And now, since there is intense competition between US and China to focus back on the moon, to focus back on lunar exploration, eventually they even have plans to set up a lunar colony, and they even consider mineral exploration in the future. So there is an intense scientific and geopolitical competition that has broken out between US and China. China has already taken quite a leap with multiple lunar missions, and now US has reactivated the Artemis program with the Artemis Accords. Multiple US allies are part of this program, including India. India is also one of the signatories to the Artemis Accords. That's why the Indian astronaut was able to fly on a US mission to the International Space Station. And India US will continue to collaborate under the Artemis program. So the current lunar program is under the same Artemis Accords. So the Artemis second lunar mission has taken off, and according to latest reports, it was a successful launch. So in this mission, three American astronauts with one Canadian, they are on board, and they will not land on the moon. They will not orbit around the moon, but they will just pass around the moon and they'll return back to Earth. Since this is the first mission after 5 decades, right? NASA is taking it slow. Landing will come later, right? As of now, the spacecraft will fly past the lunar orbit. It will not even enter into the orbit. It will again return back to the Earth's atmosphere, make a re-entry, and splash down in the Pacific. So this is one of the test experiments of sorts for further lunar missions, the manned lunar missions of NASA. Coming to the last article, in the supplement page, there's a very rare and unique species that is mentioned, the rhesus whale. According to the article, this critically endangered species of whale is being threatened because of Donald Trump. Donald Trump, who is obsessed with oil drilling. In fact, one of his campaign logo was drill baby drill, to focus more on fossil fuels. The Gulf of Mexico has plenty of oil deposits. Many big American and Western oil corporations are invested over here. And with Trump's policies, they are relaxing the environmental regulatory guidelines, pushing for more exploration and extraction of oil and hydrocarbon from Gulf of Mexico. By the way, Trump no longer calls it Gulf of Mexico. He calls it Gulf of America. US has renamed it, though the world does not recognize it. Now, in Gulf of Mexico, you have this unique and endemic species of whale. It's not found anywhere else in the world. The rhesus whale, it's found only in the Gulf of Mexico. And today, there are lesser than 100 individuals left in the wild. That is why it is critically endangered on the IUCN Red List. Less than 100 individuals are left. It is listed on Appendix 1 of the CITES Convention, prohibiting any trade uh, of this endangered species and its parts. Clear? Increase in oil exploration in the Gulf of Mexico will threaten the species, the very survival of the species, because this will probably result in more accidents, right? Where the whales might run into the vessels. Vessel strikes can happen, causing injuries and death, or it can cause pollution, leakage of oil and hazardous material, which could be harmful for the species. That's why environmental concern is being expressed about the existence and survival of the rhesus whale, which is threatened by the oil projects that are being pushed in Gulf of Mexico. So on this note, I bring the analysis to an end. I hope it was an interesting and useful session. Please let me know how it was in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Thanks for watching.